Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited you're here. Episode today, I want to start with a question. You think burnout doesn't concern you? I want to tell you to think again. Now, burnout, it's not just a buzzword. It's a critical barrier preventing healthcare professionals from living their best lives and providing the best care. Work-life. In fact, a study published in the Annals of Internal Medicine estimated that burnout costs the United States healthcare system about $4.6 billion a year in turnover and reduced clinical hours. I'm going to say that again because that is a large word, and it does in fact start with B, 4.6 billion. Today, we're going to jump in, shatter myths, offer actual real solutions, and help us pivot from just surviving to thriving in healthcare. Who wants to just get by? I don't want to just get by. I want to do well. So if you've ever felt like you're running on empty, struggling to juggle the demands of your profession with your personal life, or just curious about what burnout really means because you've heard it so much, this is the episode you can't afford to miss. Today, we're tackling the beast that lurks in the shadows of the healthcare system. It's burnout. And who better to guide us through the maze than a burnout coach and doctor of physical therapy who has turned his own battle with burnout into a lifeline for clinicians drowning in stress. We're not just scratching the surface. We want to go a little deeper with somebody who's walked the walk and is talking the talk, digging deep into the what, why, and how of burnout. Let's bring in our guest right now. It's Dr. Ricky Fernandez. Ricky, the burnout coach, is here. Ricky, welcome to the podcast.
What's going on, Jimmy? That was the best hype up I've ever had in my life. And I don't know if anything's going to top that.
I am everybody's. I tell people all the time, when you come on the show, I will be your ultimate Little John.
What? Yeah. Okay.
Like, I am your hype man. That's what I bring to the stage. That's what I bring to the table.
That's great. You're giving me flashbacks to when I was a kid driving from baseball practice with either 1010 winds on or 105.1 or 97.1. And I'm like, it's so soothing. This drive is not boring at all. You got that voice. I love it.
My mom said I had the face for radio at a young age, so I've run with it since then. First question's always the hardest, Ricky. What are we drinking? You're on the back end of being sick, so normally it would be a Manhattan, which I like, which are deadly. But you're recovering with something good for your body. Who needs that?
I know. Sometimes you have to make responsible decisions. Today, I'm going to choose to make one, and in a few hours, maybe I'll renege and pull back on it. But right now, we're going with a diet green tea from Aldi's. Do not sleep on this brand, Tico Benner. It's delicious. I drink like 2 a day. Probably regret it in 20 years because there's ingredients in it that I cannot pronounce, but
it's fine.
Future problem.
That's fine. We'll figure out a future problem. I like that. I'm doing a vodka soda because when you host a show that's sort of based over alcohol, people like to give you gifts.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And that is a large bottle of some sort of vodka that someone gave me. It's called Rain. So I made a vodka soda. So no matter what you're having, drinking is optional. I say the more the audience drinks, the smarter I sound. So cheers to you, Ricky. Thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. First round is brought to you by Owens Recovery Science. Integrate personalized blood flow restriction training into your clinical practice with Owens Recovery Science. Get certified and expert and elevate your clinical game. Start at owensrecoveryscience.com. They also have their own podcast called the Owens Recovery Science Podcast. So with a name like Ricky the Burnout Coach, we mentioned in your intro, you have some personal connection to this, and you sort of like created the solution maybe that you wish was there for you. But let's start with the basics. I want to start with the basics so we have a good foundational knowledge. Break down what burnout really looks like in clinicians. And then, because I think some people think, well, it's being tired or it's being depressed. So I want to start with the basics. Break down what burnout really looks like specifically in clinicians.
I'll paint you a picture. So hands down, the best way to do this is story time. I think that people without stories, you kind of can't connect to what we're talking about. So I'll tell you what I went through. And this is probably going to be a bit of a call out for a lot of clinicians listening to this podcast, but you will feel better by the end of this podcast, I promise. So what does burnout feel like? You know that I was thinking about this earlier. You know that Snickers commercial where it's like, you're not you and you're hungry?
First of all, great ad campaign. They get the one with Danny DeVito is my favorite, but keep going. Yeah,
You'll never forget that slogan, but the same thing applies to burnout. You're not you when you're burnt out. So I have my doctorate in physical therapy, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't know burnout was a word until my second clinical and physical therapy school. And the reason I discovered burnout as a word was because I started this clinical. It was my first time working full-time, full caseload, no pay, far commute, challenging CI. It's like we're just adding in a teaspoon of each little ingredient for burnout.
Everything's on one side of the pendulum, or the seesaw. Nothing's on the other yet.
Exactly. And if you know me in real life, I am a relatively empathetic person. I'm funny. I like to have a good time. I probably think about things too deeply, but my personality started to change while I was on the job. So a couple weeks in, I started to notice that my energy typically wasn't there. So I work out a couple times a week. I'm a walker. I like to move my body. And I noticed that even with a good night of sleep, I was carrying this exhaustion day after day in the clinic. So that's one thing that was kind of concerning. The second one was my attitude towards patients. So I, like many clinicians, maybe you got into PT because you want to help, you care about others.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of an empathy muscle in you that wants to get worked out. And what I noticed started to change was my demeanor towards patients. So I became more apathetic, didn't really care about their stories as much, saw them as complainers, sometimes found them quite annoying. And these things are easier for me to admit a couple years out now, but in the beginning, I would never say these things because it's a bit taboo for a client facing industry. So that was another change. That was the second concerning thing. And the third thing was your podcast is one that I listened to before getting into physical therapy school, on top of all the other host of ones. You have whatever. I'm not going to promote other ones on here. I don't want to do you dirty like that.
You can, if they're good, but like, which ones did you? I'm curious. Which ones did you find? Which ones helped? To me, the rising tide lifts all ships. I mentioned
There
them.
was a ton. I mean, there was physio tutors, barbell medicine,
Good.
the early days of E3 rehab. Clinical athlete was a huge one for me. There was many, and that was my rotation. And those podcasts fulfilled my physical therapy continuing education need outside of school, and it made me want to go into the profession. And when I was going through this clinical, my desire to listen to those podcasts went to zero. I actually started to
Huh.
resent the profession. I was like, wow, I'm paying a lot of money. I'm spending a lot of time in school, and the practice of PT is not as fulfilling as I thought it would. FPT is kind of what the feelings
And
were.
this is you're in your second rotation, so you're a second year, third
Yep.
second year, third
Second
year.
year.
Yeah. So these are all, I mean, you're just listing red flags, right? That now hopefully someone out there is going, oh my God, either yes, I spotted these too, or oh my gosh, yeah, I didn't. Because sometimes when you're neck deep, you can't spot these things, but they're obvious several years later. And hindsight's 2020. We love that one. But man, that sounds bad. That sounds awful because you didn't even graduate yet, and you're already feeling sort of deflated.
Imagine feeling this and you have 2 semesters to go,
Horrible.
2 clinicals to go, and you're like, we're just getting started, baby. We're just getting started. So,
Yeah.
as you can imagine, that was concerning. And it was not me. I was not feeling like typical Ricky. And people with burnout can attest. You also go through these, burnout is caused by stress, and stress affects numerous bodily systems. So, you'll go through random things here and there, GI problems, headaches, muscle pains, difficulty with sleeping.
Sleep. Oh yeah, I was gonna say sleep's gotta be huge.
Huge one. Brain fog, you can't remember chart details for your patient, so you sound incompetent. It's a whole host of issues. And so going through this, I didn't know what was happening. And because I didn't know what was happening, I was scared and I thought that I was going to lose my passion for the profession completely. In this process is when I realized, okay, let's do a little bit of research. I went to a research heavy graduate program. Let me figure out what's going on and try to understand.
Where'd you go?
Watch you.
Oh yeah, obviously.
Yeah. We go
Shirley Sarman. We'll get into
we go
We'll
hard
get
on the
into that.
research.
We'll get into Shirley Sarman stories, but keep going. So you did the thing, which was like, hey, let me science this.
Let me science this. Let me figure out what's going on. This is weird. I don't understand what's happening to me. And in this process of trying to figure it out, that's when I discovered the word burnout. And when I tell you it was the biggest sigh of relief of my life, it was amazing to see, oh, snap. The 3 components of burnout are emotional exhaustion, tick, cynicism and apathy, tick, decreased sense of professional accomplishment, tick. And in that moment is when things shifted for me completely. I was a bit disappointed that I did not get the proper prevention or education around burnout before this happened. Because if you ask me, if we're walking into physical therapy and an occupational hazard is burnout, 1 in 2 healthcare workers experience it. Let's get a little bit of education on this beforehand so we're not
Right.
sidetracked and bulldozed by it.
Ounce of prevention, pound of cure type of thing.
Prevention is the name of the game. And so this is when the mission shifted for me. And I was like, I want to help people with chronic pain. And it shifted from that to I want to help clinicians who are experiencing burnout. And it was after that experience that we got the origin of my coaching program, Bounce Back from Burnout. But for any clinicians out there, that is what burnout can look like. That is what it can feel like. You just don't feel like yourself.
Yeah. And do those three again. Do the three cardinal signs again. Because, I mean, repetition is key.
It is. Emotional exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion is you have a good night of sleep, but that exhaustion doesn't go away. The second one is it's kind of a trio: depersonalization, apathy, cynicism. Think of it as like you're sending a shell of Jimmy to work. It's not actually Jimmy going. You're going, but you're on autopilot. You're not really engaged in conversations. And then a decreased sense of professional achievement. So either you think you're doing a worse job at work or you actually are doing a worse job at work. You can't focus, your concentration's poor, you're not helping patients in the same way. Those are the three cardinal ones that you want to look out for, and they can happen in different degrees. All three, though, scary to experience regardless.
Sure. And not just that, right? There's got to be a ripple effect because it's happening to you. This is going to spill over into your personal life, that work-life balance, which I think, I mean, I've just read, is there a work-life balance? It feels like it's life, and then part of life is work, and part of life is other things other than work. But there's got to be a ripple effect on the individual because this bleeds everywhere.
The number, I would say, one and two complaints that I hear from clinicians outside of the clinic is I get home, I have these lofty ideas of I want to work out, hit the gym, cook a meal for
Right.
myself, talk to my spouse, how was your day? Instead, you get home, you shower, you eat, you hit the couch for 2 hours, doom scroll. Or you isolate yourself. So you start to remove yourself. You don't hang out with friends as much, you don't hang out with your partner as much because your body is simply overwhelmed with the amount of stress you're experiencing at work. You don't have the
Yeah.
bandwidth for life outside work. And that's when typically physical therapists start asking themselves, is this worth it? I'm helping other patients, but is this helping myself?
Yeah. I mean, you're painting some flags where I'm thinking of some people. I mean, I dated a physical therapist, a colleague right after PT school, and this was them. This was some of that.
Yeah, it's common. It happens a lot. And, we can get into the conversation around how do you respond to that? What do you do when that happens? But
Yeah.
first thing I want people to do is just develop a little bit of self awareness and understand what you're experiencing in healthcare. You're not a freak, it's not an accident. It is the result of being in a system that's overly taxed. And so it's okay to admit that you might regret your choice to be in healthcare or
Yeah.
that you're having these negative feelings. We don't want to shun or make those sorts of things that you say taboo because it simply makes it worse.
So let's do that because I like the fact that words have power because taboo typically exists when you don't talk about it, right? Or you whisper about it. But if we shout it, it sort of like shines a light on those things. So what are some common misconceptions? What are some things that maybe people, what are some myths so we can sort of bust these taboos? Like what are the ones that come up
What's
like often?
Yeah, what's more fun than myth busting? So
I don't know.
I got two for you. The first one is that this
Yeah.
goes away on its own. So
Yeah,
time,
suck it up.
suck it up, figure it out. Time tends to heal all wounds, most wounds, a good majority of wounds. Burnout, not one of them. I see many clinicians who just hope that things get better. So you might think you're going through a season, and it's possible you're going through a season of burnout, but for the most part, this doesn't resolve itself on its own. The problem is in how much stress you are receiving at work and how you're interacting with that stress. If one of those variables doesn't change, then you're going to continue to experience the stress that's causing you to feel burnt out. So the first thing that I tell people is don't expect this to go away over time. There's a genuine cost of inaction to not working on your burnout. And that cost of inaction can be 15 years down the road, you realize I just wasted 15 years miserable and depressed in
Mm,
my profession. Or my relationship at home suffered because I wasn't able to be present and I was irritable towards my partner. Patients weren't being served in the best way possible because I had brain fog
sure.
and I was unable to concentrate. Second big one, vacations. Vacations are something that I love to engage in. I'm going to go on a few in the next year. I'm not anti vacation. No one's paying me
Yeah.
from a big anti vacation, but they do not cure burnout. It's not going to magically make your life better. If we really want to get deep, vacations are an extended form of avoidance where we get away from the stressor and we get a little bit of relief from that. But what happens in those last 2 to 3 days of vacation when you realize my emails are still piling up in Outlook?
I'm
Yep,
back.
patients are waiting for me. Caseload hasn't changed. Boundaries haven't changed. It's kind of an intimidating and dreadful thing to anticipate on the way back to
Sure.
work.
It's like amped up version of the Sunday scaries, and it's a band-aid on a bullet hole. It's like, yeah, I'm sure you did, 3 days in. I was reading some research on, I think it said that an 8-day vacation is perfect, where they said like it's long enough to turn off and enjoy, but longer than 8 days wasn't necessarily better. So they're like, if you have limited vacation time, they're like, take multiple 8-day vacations instead of like 1 2-week vacation. Um, but yeah, bandit in a bullet hole, right? You're avoiding. I like how you put that, which is just an amped up version of avoidance. All right, so that's one. What was the second?
Vacations was the second one. The first one was that it goes away over time. There's tons of little
Oh yeah,
myths littered in there as well. Um, but the big one that I want clinicians to take away from this is that a passive approach is not the move here. We don't want to just give this time and see if it resolves itself on its own. More often than not, there is some lesson, some challenge that you are being called to respond to. Something's being exposed. It could potentially
sure.
be your workplace is toxic and it's not a good fit. It could potentially be your boundaries with work are unfit for your needs. It could be a history of people pleasing or perfectionism. We don't know yet. It depends on the person, but burnout is typically a lesson waiting to be learned. So let's step up to the plate and learn what that's about. What's going on here?
So let's get specific, right? Well, of course, every person, every clinician is going to be unique, and they're going to have different drivers, some more than others that you just mentioned. But what are some key strategies? People come to you, right? Your role also is this burnout coach or someone who's walked the walk and now is talking the talk, and you understand what it was like to be there, and you got yourself out, or I would say you didn't get yourself out. You figured out some tools to arm yourself because you probably still have to use these tools to make sure burnout doesn't creep back in. So
Every day.
what are some of those strategies or tools that you'd recommend for managing stress, establishing effective boundaries, and removing all these things?
Really good question. And this is every day for me. I'll say it right here. I don't do anything special. I do the basics really well. If you do the basics really well, this doesn't have to be an issue for you. So what are some of the basics? Self-awareness. If we do not have self-awareness around what the problem is, we can't see it. If we can't see it, then we can't treat it. So this means getting in touch with some of your signs of stress. I'll give you an example. I'm an overthinker. I'm just going to say it. It's something that I'm working on in therapy constantly, and I'm getting better at it with time. But there are signs that your body probably gives you when you're running on 6 hours of sleep 5 days in a row,
Yeah.
or you're extremely exhausted from seeing patients. This might be procrastination. Maybe you just can't get yourself to do that thing on your to-do list and you're staring at it week after week. This might be rumination. So you latch on to a negative thought or something that someone said in passing, but you can't let go of it. And you make a story behind it. Maybe this is paralysis at making decisions. This is the issue that I run into, which is I can't choose a brand of soap off of Amazon when I'm stressed out. And I know now
Yeah.
that it's not because the 4.7 star is better than the 4.6. It's because my body's telling me, dude, you're stressed out. And like we can't make these little
Yeah.
simple logical decisions. So, what I encourage clinicians to do, step one, is what are your signs of stress? Who do you become when you're not feeling you? You see how I just twisted that slogan a little bit?
Like I'm picturing Danny DeVito, right? Like, you're not you when you're hungry.
100%, 100%. So, this can look different for everyone. Maybe you start losing sleep. Maybe you get short and irritable with your partner. Maybe you stop going to the gym as much. As long as you can build self awareness on the menu of ways that you show up when you're stressed out, that is step one. Without that, we're going to go through needless cycles of burnout and stress. The next thing that I want clinicians to do is multifaceted. So, burnout is caused by chronic stress that goes unchecked for a long time. And so, if we can intervene in there and either stop that stress or better manage it, we give ourselves a fighting chance. And there are many different ways of approaching stress. Don't fall for the wellness industry BS ones. This does not include,
Yeah.
say it again.
Which are what? Which ones are the BS
I
ones?
got
How
you.
do we? Yeah.
Green juices, crystals, aromatherapy, massages, vacations, anything where you pay a lot of money and the promise is that your life problems are solved is
And then the
likely not
problem
going
is
to,
still
and the
there.
problem's still there. So
Okay.
if you guys want to learn more about taking care of yourself, there's a great book called Real Self-Care by Pooja Lakshmi, and she goes over the 4 principles of self-care. I'm validated because I was using some of these in my program before reading the book, so let's go through a few of them. A big one is boundaries. Boundaries is essentially what is and is not acceptable for others to do in your presence. And I cannot tell you how many clinicians that I interact with who have never explored what their style of boundaries are for the clinic. Because I don't know about you, but I know in physical therapy school, the kind of student that I was trained to be, and this probably stems from before physical therapy school, just being a good person is a little bit of a pushover, a little bit of a people pleaser, a little bit of a
Right.
perfectionist. And it's uncomfortable to say things like, no, this is my admin time. I'm not able to accept another patient here, or I will not look at my emails after 5 p.m. at night once I leave the clinic. The kinds of boundaries you set are going to depend on your specific situation. But if there are unwanted sources of stress that you might be allowing into your life, we got to look there because that's a leaky faucet.
Yeah.
That's one area. Another one,
Okay.
self compassion. Self compassion is basically your internal best friend. Think of it as the version of Jimmy who is extremely kind and compassionate to himself. So, a
Okay.
common cycle that a clinician might fall into is I had a rough evaluation, or I treated this person and I forgot to include this one exercise. I don't think I'm doing a really good job at physical therapy. I'm missing things. My coworkers and my CI are telling me that I'm missing all these different signs and tests that I should be implementing. Okay, it's a long game. It's going to take time to figure these things out. In the process, if you can be self compassionate towards yourself, you can reduce that internal stress. So, this means
Sure.
turning towards that criticism with compassion and reminding yourself, hey, this is a long game. You are going to make mistakes. You're going to mess up, and that's okay. An easy exercise you can do here, and I use this all the time. If you're struggling with a negative thought or a negative situation, just think about if you had your best friend sitting across from you at the dinner table and they were venting these same problems to you. How would you counsel them?
Mm, I like that.
You'd probably be a little bit more kinder, let them know that it doesn't all have to fall on your back. You're a good physical therapist. This doesn't mean that we have to burn the entire ship. Whatever you would tell that friend is what you need to tell yourself. And that is a muscle. Self compassion is not a one and done, I do it once and my life is great forever. It is a muscle
Yeah.
that we have
Right.
to constantly be working. So that's the second one. Third one, core values. Core values, core values, core values. If you rolled your eyes when hearing core values because you're thinking of some large organizational core values that don't resonate with you,
Right.
I got you. This is not that. Trust me, we're not going down that route. Core values are the principles that you live life by. So the best analogy for this is, let's say I took you and I dropped you in the middle of California and I said, Jimmy, I need you to go to New Jersey. And all you had was a compass. That compass is your core values. It is going to show you what direction to head in no matter where you are. Goals are different from core values. Those are like stopping points along the way. But core values
Right.
are the principles, whether you're open minded, whether you're humorous, whether you're accountable, whether you're a hard worker, whatever they are. Those are going to let you know the kinds of actions you need to take in life in order to feel most fulfilled. And more often than not, people aren't even aware of what their core values are to begin with. So when you go through these
Mm.
days of work feels monotonous, I don't feel much passion outside of work. Is this really all that life has to offer? I'm 27 and this is it. Like I'm just going to show up as a PT for the next 15 years. Take a look at your core values. It's a good chance that you're not living out a key component of one of those values. I can keep going, but I think those are three.
I'm taking notes. I'm taking notes. So that was 3, right? So we have boundaries, self-care, core values. I'm taking notes in the notebook. What's 4?
We can keep going. There's a lot of different causes of stress. So if we're talking common ones that I see with clinicians, a big one is people pleasing and perfectionism. So if we think about what got us to where we are, what allowed us to go to these institutions, get these good grades, achieve our DPT, become relatively high achieving individuals, oftentimes it is this balance of perfectionism where we're hard on ourselves when we make mistakes. It's not acceptable to get bad grades. We beat ourselves up for making mistakes. And in a way, that perfectionism serves you. It allows you to be an efficacious clinician. You'll study outside of the clinic. You'll make sure you have your patients back next time you have the appointment with them. And also, we have to recognize that when we enter the real world past graduate school, that your job is not the only stressor that exists. We now have housing to account for, cars to account for, family to account for. a bunch of different stressors. And so if you carry this sense of perfectionism, this black and white thinking of either I am a good or a bad clinician, you can simply make this spiral worse for yourself when you enter the workforce.
Sure.
And I tell people all the time, I'm sure there are more gray professions than physical therapy, but physical therapy is relatively gray. Things you see in clinic are not always black and white in terms of how to approach
It
them.
depends.
It depends. Oh, I love that one. It gives me flashbacks to
Love that.
school. Um, but there's a lot of gray area in clinical practice. And unless
Sure.
we can embrace that and give ourselves permission to not know the answer every single time, we're going to go through many cycles of self defeating thoughts and feeling overly stressed about situations we might not have any control over. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So let me ask you this. It sounds like a lot of this is, and I'm going to hate, my professors are laughing right now because they made us do a lot of this in PT school and I hated it. But it sounds like this starts with a reflection. This starts with self-reflection, which is a thing I just absolutely hated in PT school. Because again, who had the time to pause? And I have to go study the 4,900 PowerPoint slides that my neuro professor gave me yesterday before tomorrow. It sounds like it's reflection, understanding where my friction points would be, because mine are different than Ricky's and different than someone else's, right? These are unique to me and me alone, but it might be similar to what other people are saying. And it sounds like it's using the strategies to then get yourself out of this situation or change your environment. Maybe you do recognize that I'm in a place that is not going to be malleable to this thing. And sometimes, they say winners never quit. And Seth Godin, a great business writer, said, no, winners quit all the time. They actually know when to quit. And they have track records of being good quitters. Seth Godin calls it the dip. He's like, it's something's riding high and then it dips, and winners are typically able to say this has a chance and likelihood to get better. And then people who maybe aren't having this good long-term mindset, like, I'll just keep riding. It's like sometimes the ship keeps going down. There was one called the Titanic. So it sounds like there's a little bit of reflection in there and using tools, but some of this is a mindset shift. And you talk about that in terms of overcoming burnout. Like, what was your moment, or, some of it? You talked a little bit about it in PT school, but, mindset shift isn't just a mindset to think, suck it up, think happy thoughts. Mindset's different than that.
It is different than that. We're not advocating for toxic positivity and you just kind of
Right.
wish your problems away. It doesn't help.
Right.
And so I want to preface this by saying, if you're listening to this and you're like, damn, Ricky, it feels like a lot of this falls on my back, this is my caveat. Burnout likely wasn't your fault. It is not your fault. If we worked and we lived in a system that gave us the adequate resources that we needed to be healthy, functioning employees and clinicians, I wouldn't have a job. We wouldn't be having this conversation. We'd all be good.
Right.
We'd be great, but we don't. So I say that to let you know burnout's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to take the required action to put yourself in a better position. And given that mindset shift, I'll be honest, the big mindset shift for me. So when I was in physical therapy school, I knew that I was going to do something on my own. I thought that thing on my own was going to be running a clinic or working in a very progressive clinic. Like I said, I'm pretty studious. I like doing things for myself. I have this bias of thinking that I'm approaching problems in the best way possible. Maybe I'm human, who knows? But a big mindset shift for me after going through burnout was realizing the autonomy that I needed to have in my life. So for myself, this was shifting from, okay, I can be an employee, I can show up at a clinic and live that life, and that's great. But when it comes to the best long term predictor for burnout recovery, it is autonomy and having a sense of control. And the mindset shift for myself was, what can I do to put myself in a position of control? And this is where also the origin of bounce back from burnout came from, is that I realized that involved working for myself and doing something for myself. It didn't have to be in a full time capacity, but there was going to be some endeavor outside of physical therapy that was me using my creative brain and figuring out how to impact the world in my own specific way. And I think burnout was the impetus. It's what pushed me further in that direction for doing that. And when it comes to creating that autonomy for yourself, it doesn't always look like starting a side hustle. And it doesn't always look like
Right.
starting a business. For many clinicians,
Right.
this is simply learning to have a voice in the clinic and learning how to say no and learning how to say boundaries, figuring out what is it you are going to stand for and not stand for. What are the situations where you're going to have to sit down with the patient and let them know your rules of operation, or your manager and let them know what kind of work is and is not acceptable for your own well-being. So this is why I advocate people to figure out how can you get more autonomy in some way in your job, because with that autonomy, you will have the best chance of beating burnout long term.
Yeah. So all right. So I'll put back on you. What are the core values of bounce back from burnout? What are the core values of the program that you use to work with people who are very similar, who maybe are nodding along with this episode, maybe more than they thought they would be? What are the core values of the program that you've put together and created?
That's a really good question. So I'll start with the core values for myself because I'm doing my own thing. And in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
my work is just the embodiment of my own personal work. I am imperfect. I am not standing on a pedestal compared to people I work with or other clinicians. This is me learning lessons along the way, trying to filter out the BS and give you the mistakes I've made so you can improve and have a better career as a clinician. When it comes to my own core values, we're looking at open mindedness. So, open mindedness in the sense of it's hard for me to think of things in black and white. And I really just like embracing many different sides to a story, many different sides to an individual. Humor is a big one. I know this can sometimes fly in the face of professionalism, but the older I get, the less I care about that, to be honest with you. I think humor it can run hand in hand with
Sure.
unprofessionalism, but also authenticity and you being your own human being and what resonates with you.
Yeah.
Accountability is a big one for me. I have a son, I have a family, I have a lot of different things that I'm responsible for. Accountability is a big one, showing up on time, making sure that you're going to do what you say that you're going to do. Now, when it comes to bounce back from burnout, I think the biggest value that I try to imbue or give to people that I work with is get back control, get back in the driver's seat. Do not fall into this autopilot. Life is just happening to me. This is the typical life of a physical therapist. So it's okay what I'm experiencing attitude. And I know that can sound like radical responsibility or radical accountability for your own life. And I know that. I want it to sound that way because we are not given a lot of time on this earth. And we spend a lot of
Yeah.
time to get the degrees that we get. And so you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your family, you owe it to your patients to take the steps that might be unpopular and unsavory, but that are going to leave you in a better spot. I always tell people when I work
Yeah.
with them, it's like, we'll do our work together in the time span that we're working, but I don't want to see your face forever. I don't want to see anyone that long. At a certain point, I want
Yeah.
you to know what is the best way to practice stress wise, boundary wise, specialty wise, that are going to leave you feeling good in the long term. And that starts with identifying, okay, what can I change in myself and in my environment to enact that control over things so that I'm not back in this position of feeling burnt out?
Trying to work yourself out of a job, arming someone else, right? So it's, bad business model, but it's a good care model.
Fair.
We're gonna have the link for your program, all the socials, because you do share bits of information like a good communicator that you are. That's how I found you. I found you on Instagram. I was like, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about, and he's sharing little bits of these tactics and everything we sort of talked about today. You sort of fracture and put out in a bunch of different 30, 60, 90-second videos. So we'll share everything in the show notes. But are you ready to do 3 questions?
I'm always ready.
Let's do 3 questions.
On the hot seat with 3 questions on the PT Pintcast.
It's always good to have the voiceover. All right, 3 questions. It is brought to you by our friends keeping the show afloat. 3 questions brought to you by ATI. They're leading the charge in PT clinical research with all 900 plus clinics achieving top marks in CMS's merit-based incentive program. That's MIPS. They're the team to join for career growth. Explore opportunities with them at ATIPT.com. All right, so 3 questions. I'm going to go this first. Let's go with an unexpected twist, Ricky. Apparently, there's a story about your transition from burning out in baseball to playing in college. What's going on there? What happened?
This story, I mean, you could take so many different interpretations of this story. I feel like it's a therapist's dream when you hear it. Um, I played baseball my entire life. I played baseball. If you ever played baseball in New York, you know the scene is competitive. Like we live and breathe baseball in New
Sure.
York. And there was one summer as a kid where I played for 5 travel teams
Wow.
simultaneously in the summer, over 100 games. Was I happy
Wow.
about this? Absolutely not. Was I in control and heard when I was like, this isn't fun? Also not. Wasn't really my
Wow.
choice. But that was also the kind of practice and caliber of competition that you needed to involve yourself in to achieve the next step or achieve the next level. And so by the time I finished high school, I basically hung up my cleats. I did well as a senior. I decided I don't want to play baseball anymore. I just want to be a regular student. These practices after class are killing me. I love my baseball teammates and hanging out with them and making friends. I also love sitting down and just not doing things every single day of the week. When I ended
Yeah.
up getting to university, I think I went through 1 or 2 weeks. We had orientation week and then the week after, and I ended up getting this email from the head baseball coach. "Hey, Ricky," person, "I heard that you played baseball in high school. Seems like you did okay for yourself. Would you ever wanna come try out for the team?" And I'm sitting there in my dorm wondering, "How do I give off, like, a scent that just attracts
Yeah. How they
baseball
know?
coaches? How do they know?" It was my dad. My dad went behind my back and
Ah,
he emailed the coach at the school, letting him know, "Hey, you got this kid Ricky. He's from the Bronx. He plays good baseball. All the things you have to do to hype up your son as a dad." And the coach was like, "Hey, why don't you come try out and just see how that goes?" So I ended up doing it somewhat against my will. And it was honestly a blessing in disguise because I made the team and I played for them for 4 years. And it was hands down one of the best parts of my experience in college. And the weird part about this story is that would that be appropriate parent behavior for other people?
right. I'm looking down at the list you gave me. One of them is boundaries. I don't know, man.
I think a lot of boundaries were crossed in that situation, right? But then again,
But it puts you in a good position.
it put me in a good position. It forced me back into baseball in college, and college baseball is a lot different. I don't know if you've ever played a college sport.
No.
It's a lot different than high school. It is a little bit more demanding in certain ways, and in other ways, there's a little bit more freedom and not as much hounding, accountability, and control on top of you. And so it was really fun in that aspect. And also, when you show up at college for the first time, you don't know anyone. And so when you're placed in a
Right.
social
Right.
setting, when
Right.
you're immediately forced to interact with tons of different people, it gives you a leg up in terms of having some friend network.
Sure. Community and everything like that.
100%.
All right.
100%.
All right. So, we'll say it's a yellow flag doing that to your kid, being his hype, being your kid's little John, your hype man. Second question on 3 questions. If you had to recommend one completely non-medical activity or hobby that could surprisingly help with burnout, what would it be?
Non medical activity or hobby that could help with burnout.
Yeah, so it's like not, give them something that's non-traditional, right? Like journaling would be that's more traditional. What's a non-medical thing that you're like, you know what? Try this.
Gotcha. Oof, a couple of different things come to mind. I would
Go
say
for it.
one of the best ones that I have found is social support. I think we are I'm speaking generally, but I think we are in an era of loneliness, and I think it is difficult for
Sure.
people to make friends as they become adults.
The attorney general had listed it as an epidemic in terms of epidemic of loneliness, especially amongst adults.
100%. And I feel those pressures myself as I become an adult. And navigating that arena is a constant challenge as you
Yeah,
get older. And so when we think of how humans typically are supposed to be operating in the environment, it's part of a tribe. It's having people around you who you can share wins with and share losses with and receive empathy from. And that has an actual tangible effect on your physical and mental health. And so, one thing that I always advocate for is audit your social circle, figure out if it's working for you. And if it's not, how can we align you in the position of people who are going to be there for you, who are going to let you be authentic and
yeah,
receive empathy from them and not attack you for who you are as a person? There's many different ways to obviously find friends, but this is sort of the non-traditional way of beating burnout is get the right people around you who are going to support
yeah.
you.
You're supposedly the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? And also, I'll go one step further. I wrote a thread on this on Twitter a while ago in terms of we call it a social media feed, and we say you are what you eat, you are what you consume. So you are typically the result of the 5 things that you consume the most: what you listen to, what you read, what you watch. So audit your social diet, audit your social media diet. Those things feel like they're hand in hand. All right, third question. Desert island scenario, Ricky. Desert island, just you. You're stranded out there alone, but luckily you can take one thing with you that symbolizes your approach to beating burnout. What would it be? You can have one thing, but it's got to symbolize Ricky's beat back burnout. Like, well, how does it symbolize your program? Go for it.
That's hilarious. I'm like, can I shrink my therapist and then just have them on
And
my
bring
shoulder
them
the entire time?
on a friend.
Right. You know, okay. So I'm a big music guy. I love music. I think if I was on an island and I could never listen to music again, I would go stir crazy. I would not be able to survive.
Yeah.
That would be a big one for me. At least I can have dopamine rushes from the music I'm listening to as I'm starving to death and
You know
dying of
what?
dehydration.
Here's why I like this, and I give you full points for this, because it goes back to you reflected about what your core values were, and that is your self-care. So you're like, listen, if I got to be here, outside of a boat full of food, which wasn't allowed, doing something that allowed self-care is it. All right, that's 3 questions. Last thing we do on the show, Ricky, is called the parting shot.
This is the parting shot.
All right, parting shot is brought to you by our friends from the Academy of Orthopedic Physical Therapy. Find them online at orthopt.org. Master Orthopedic Physical Therapy with the Academy of Orthopedic Physical Therapy's 5th edition of their current concepts of orthopedic PT. It's your gateway to expertise. If you're someone contemplating getting just 3 letters after your name, if they happen to be O and C and S, you might be like, I don't know how I'm going to navigate from California to New Jersey to get to sit for that exam. That's what Current Concepts is all about. So check them out at orthopt.org. So, all right, Ricky, last idea, sentiment, mic drop moment, soapbox statement, whatever you want for your parting shot.
100%. Burnout's a gift. Burnout is a gift. It doesn't seem like it in the moment, but it is one of the best things that can happen to you as a clinician. And the reason I say that is, again, not toxic positivity, but when you really examine what's going on when you're experiencing burnout, it is shining a spotlight on some fear, some stressors, some behaviors in your life that have gone unexamined for too long and are no longer serving you. And we can use burnout as an opportunity to shine the spotlight on those behaviors, examine what beliefs or stories or emotions are leading to those behaviors, and then change that story, rewire that belief. So when we're placed in the same position in your clinic, at your home, with your job, we don't have the same subsequent action or result take place. It's really difficult to feel that and take that space to examine and analyze what's going on when you're going through it and you're in the thick of it. This is why I advocate getting with a coach, getting with a therapist, someone you can have some objective ideas to bounce off of. But when you're ready to learn the lesson and you're here to learn the lesson, you will soon realize burnout is actually a good thing and there's a lot to be learned from it.
All right. In the show notes, in the description of the YouTube live stream, you can find all of Ricky's details and get in touch with him. Check out his program. This is really just the tip of the iceberg, right? We're just kind of over it. I mean, 45 minutes, we're at tip of the iceberg level. Make sure to subscribe to the show or follow the show. Actually, on the Apple apps now, they don't say subscribe when the Apple podcast thing. They say follow. That's cool. So follow us for free. If you don't follow us and you don't listen to stuff, we don't know if we should make more. We have no idea of knowing that. So you tell us what you like. Hit us on the socials at PT Pintcast. Ricky, appreciate your insight. I took notes. Very few times do I actually take written notes
I appreciate
on
you.
an episode.
Yeah.
And this was definitely it. So thank you so much for this, man. I appreciate it.
100%. Appreciate you having me.
All right. They say the best conversations happen at happy hour. Thanks for coming to ours.